His hands were crushing my throat. Not choking. Crushing. There's a difference, and I learned it in those seconds when my vision started to tunnel and my lungs burned like I'd inhaled fire. Choking is what happens when you can't breathe. Crushing is what happens when someone wants to make sure you never breathe again. I could feel his thumbs pressing into my windpipe. Deliberate. Controlled. The way you'd apply pressure to a sealed container you wanted to crack open. Admiral Jonathan Crowell wasn't in a rage. He wasn't out of control. His breathing was steady. His grip was clinical. And his face was calm. I tried to pull in air and couldn't. My body convulsed, instinct overriding training, hands clawing at his wrists. But he was bigger, heavier, and he had gravity on his side. My boots scraped against the concrete floor of that empty logistics bay, looking for purchase, finding nothing. The sound echoed in the dark. Metal on stone, desperate and hollow. He leaned closer. Close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. No one's coming, Ward. My vision was going black when someone screamed my call sign and the Admiral froze. Before I tell you how this ends, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't stay buried without people like you keeping it alive. My name is Lieutenant Commander Elise Ward. United States Navy. 22 years of service. 3 combat deployments. 2 commendations for valor. My call sign is Cold Meridian, and if you've heard it before, you know it doesn't show up when things are going well. I wasn't supposed to walk away from that logistics bay. I wasn't supposed to be here, telling you this story. But I am. And he isn't. Let me take you back to that moment. To the feeling of hands around my throat and the taste of blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue trying not to scream. Because screaming would have given him satisfaction, and I wasn't about to give Jonathan Crowell one more second of satisfaction in this life. He was smiling. Not a big smile. Just the corners of his mouth turned up, the way someone smiles when they're watching a dog finally learn a trick. He thought he'd won. He thought this was over. His grip tightened. I felt cartilage shift in my throat, and he whispered, "This ends now. No witnesses. No evidence. No Cold Meridian." You want to know what I was thinking in that moment? I was thinking about how many times I'd saluted this man. How many times I'd stood at attention while he handed out medals and speeches about honor and duty and the chain of command. How many times I'd watched junior officers look at him with something like worship in their eyes because Admiral Jonathan Crowell was a legend. Decorated. Respected. Untouchable. And I was thinking about how much I hated him. Not the hot, wild kind of hate. The cold kind. The kind that calculates. The kind that waits. But let me tell you why he wanted me gone in the first place. Because this didn't start in that logistics bay. This started 3 years earlier, in the South China Sea, when I made a decision that saved 18 lives and destroyed his reputation. We were running an extraction op. High-value target, hostile territory, tight window. Crowell was operational command from the carrier. I was boots-on-ground team lead. The mission brief was clean. Get in, secure the asset, get out. Minimal engagement. 0 deviation. Except when we hit the ground, the intel was wrong. The compound wasn't lightly guarded. It was a kill box. And our asset wasn't alone. There were 6 civilian contractors trapped in the same location, people our intelligence community had somehow forgotten to mention. Crowell's voice came through comms, cold and clear. Abort secondary targets. Secure primary and extract. He wanted me to leave them. I didn't. I diverted 2 team members, pulled those contractors out through a route that wasn't on any map, and got everyone to the evac point with 4 minutes to spare. 0 casualties. Mission complete. You'd think that would be celebrated. It wasn't. Because when the after-action review happened, it came out that Crowell's intelligence brief had been incomplete. He'd signed off on faulty reconnaissance. He'd sent us into a situation he hadn't properly assessed. And when I pulled those contractors out alive, I made it impossible for him to bury that failure. The Navy gave me a commendation. Crowell gave me a target on my back. You have to understand something about men like Jonathan Crowell. They don't see service as sacrifice. They see it as a ladder. And every rung on that ladder is built on making sure no one beneath you ever climbs higher. My success wasn't inspiration to him. It was humiliation. So he smiled in public and sharpened knives in private. After that mission, things changed. Slowly at first. Small things. I'd submit operational reports, and they'd come back with notes about tone and insubordination. I'd be excluded from planning sessions I should have been in. Junior officers who used to ask my advice started avoiding eye contact in the corridors. Crowell made sure everyone knew proximity to me was a career risk. But here's the thing about being good at your job. People notice. And when the missions I led kept coming back successful, when my teams had the lowest casualty rates and the highest completion percentages, it got harder for him to isolate me completely. Every time I succeeded, he resented it more. There was an op in the Horn of Africa. Anti-piracy interdiction. My team neutralized a hijacking situation without firing a shot. Crowell was in the room when the briefing happened, when the Secretary of the Navy called it textbook crisis management. I watched his jaw tighten, watched his hands curl into fists under the table. 2 weeks later, I was called into his office for an informal performance review. Informal. That's what he called it. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, looking at me the way you'd look at a malfunctioning piece of equipment. Ward, he said, I'm concerned about your decision-making under pressure. Some of your recent calls have been unorthodox. Unorthodox. The operation he was talking about had a zero-casualty outcome and recovered $40 million in cargo. I stayed silent. Let him talk. I think it might be beneficial, he continued, for you to undergo a psychological evaluation. Just to make sure you're stable. Command carries a lot of weight. I need to know my officers can handle it. There it was. Not a performance issue. A mental health concern. The kind of thing that gets noted in your file. The kind of thing that follows you. The kind of thing that makes promotion boards hesitate. I looked him in the eye and said, I'll schedule it immediately, sir. He blinked. He'd expected me to push back. To give him ammunition. I didn't. I took the evaluation. Passed with flying colors. The psychologist's report praised my emotional regulation and crisis management capabilities. Crowell couldn't bury it, so he ignored it. But the pattern was set. Every success I had, he tried to reframe as a liability. Every decision I made, he questioned. He started assigning me to operations that were designed to fail, undersourced, poorly planned, with impossible timelines. He wanted me to crack. To make a mistake big enough that he could justify removing me. I didn't crack. I adjusted. Compensated. Made it work. And that made him angrier. There was a joint operation with the Marine Corps. Coastal reconnaissance. Crowell assigned me as liaison, but he gutted my support team and gave me contradictory objectives. The Marines were expecting coordination. I showed up with half the resources I needed and orders that didn't match their mission parameters. It should have been a disaster. Instead, I spent 3 days working double shifts, rebuilt the communication protocols from scratch, and turned it into one of the smoothest joint operations that quarter. The Marine Colonel sent a commendation letter directly to the CNO. Crowell didn't speak to me for a month. But he was watching. Always watching. Captain Owen Stratton saw it too. He was Crowell's executive officer, a man who'd built his career on reading the room and never making waves. I'd catch him watching sometimes when Crowell would dress me down in front of the staff for some invented infraction. Stratton's face would tighten, just slightly. He knew. But he never said a word. Because speaking up would mean choosing a side. And Owen Stratton had never chosen a side that wasn't his own career advancement. So he watched. And stayed silent. And his silence made everything that came next possible. This wasn't discipline anymore. This was preparation. Crowell was isolating me. Systematically. Methodically. He reassigned officers who'd worked with me successfully. He blocked me from training rotations. He started spreading rumors, quiet ones, the kind that don't trace back but stick anyway. Ward's unstable. Ward doesn't follow orders. Ward's talented but dangerous. Every dangerous assignment that came up, my name was on it. Every mission with a high probability of failure, I was team lead. He was building a narrative. Elise Ward is brilliant but reckless, and sooner or later, her luck will run out. He wanted me to fail in a way that looked like my fault. But I kept not failing. And that's when things got lethal. Things escalated after the Yemen extraction. It was a high-risk op pulled off in 18 hours with a team I'd trained personally. We got the asset out, neutralized the threat, and left zero footprint. It was the kind of operation that gets studied in war colleges. The press got wind of it. Not the details, those stayed classified, but enough. Navy Special Operations scores major victory. My name wasn't in the articles, but people inside the community knew. Word travels fast in our circles. I was in a planning meeting when Crowell found out. He walked in mid-briefing, face like granite, and dismissed everyone except me. The door closed. He didn't sit down. Just stood there, hands behind his back, staring at me with something that had gone beyond resentment. It was hatred now. Pure and simple. You think you're bulletproof, Ward? I stood at attention. Said nothing. You think because you've had a few lucky operations, you're untouchable? That I can't reach you? No, sir. You're wrong. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. I've ended careers longer than yours for less. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Good. He smiled then. That same smile I'd see later when his hands were around my throat. Because this conversation never happened. And if you repeat it, I'll make sure everyone knows you're unstable. Paranoid. A talented officer who cracked under pressure. He left. I stood there for 5 minutes alone in that room, understanding with perfect clarity that one of us was going to have to disappear. That's when I crossed the line he couldn't forgive. I started documenting everything. Every order. Every evaluation. Every conversation. I kept copies off base, encrypted, stored in 3 separate locations. I started noticing patterns in his behavior, how he'd assign certain officers to operations designed to fail, how he'd systematically destroy anyone who threatened his narrative of control. And I found something else. Financial irregularities. Contract approvals that didn't match procurement records. Money moving through accounts it shouldn't have been in. Nothing huge. Nothing obvious. But there. A pattern of small corruptions that added up to something prosecutable. Crowell was skimming. Not millions. Enough to matter. Enough to end a career. Enough to justify everything he'd done to protect himself. I didn't confront him. I documented it. Carefully. Methodically. Built a case that would survive scrutiny. And I sent copies to 3 people, Commander Nathan Mercer, who'd been my mentor since I was a junior officer, Director Marion Lowell at Naval Intelligence, and my lawyer. Insurance. Then I waited. Crowell must have sensed something had shifted. He started moving faster. The assignments got more dangerous. The isolation tactics got more aggressive. Junior officers stopped talking to me entirely. I'd walk into rooms and conversations would stop. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes was the only one who didn't flinch. Danny had been with me on 4 deployments. He knew my work. He knew my character. And when everyone else started treating me like I was radioactive, Danny stayed steady. Something's wrong, he told me one night in the mess hall, voice low. Crowell's making moves. Big ones. You need to watch your 6. I know. You have a plan? I have insurance. He nodded. Didn't ask what kind. Danny understood operational security better than most officers. If something happens, I said quietly, if I go dark for more than 12 hours, there's a signal. You'll know it when you see it. Your call sign. Yeah. He looked at me for a long moment. You think he'd go that far? I think he's already decided. Now he's just picking the moment. 3 weeks later, I got the call. Crowell's aide. Polite. Professional. The Admiral would like to see you for a debrief. 1900 hours. Logistics Bay 7. Logistics Bay 7. Off the main base. Minimal foot traffic. No security cameras in that section due to a maintenance backlog that had been ignored for 8 months. I knew it was a trap. Every instinct I had screamed it. Everything about the setup was wrong. The location. The timing. The informal nature of the summons. But if I didn't show, it would be insubordination. Refusal of a direct order. He'd have grounds to bring me up on charges, and this time, there'd be no defense. So I went. But I didn't go unprepared. I wore the biometric monitor I'd had custom-built. Small. Undetectable under my uniform. Keyed to my vital signs. If my heart rate spiked beyond combat parameters or dropped below a certain threshold, if I went unconscious or worse, it would transmit everything I'd documented. Every file. Every recording. Every piece of evidence I had on Crowell's corruption. It would go to Mercer. To Lowell. To my lawyer. And it would broadcast my call sign. Cold Meridian. The signal that meant things had gone catastrophically wrong. I arrived at 1900 exactly. The bay was dark except for a single work light in the corner. Empty pallets. Cleaning supplies. The smell of diesel and rust. Crowell was waiting. No aide. No witness. Just him. Ward, he said. Pleasant. Conversational. Thank you for coming. Sir, I wanted to talk to you privately. Away from the noise. He gestured around the empty bay. We've had our differences. I think it's time we cleared the air. I said nothing. Waited. You're a talented officer, he continued. But talent without discipline is dangerous. You've made choices that undermine the chain of command. That put people at risk. With respect, sir, my operational record speaks for itself. His expression hardened. Your operational record is built on insubordination and luck. And luck runs out. Is that what this is about? Luck. This is about an officer who doesn't understand her place. My place? Your place, he said, stepping closer, is wherever I tell you it is. And right now, your place is gone. That's when I knew. This wasn't a debrief. This wasn't even a confrontation. This was an execution. I backed up. He matched me step for step. My hand went instinctively to my hip, looking for a weapon that wasn't there. He smiled. No one's coming, Ward. No one knows you're here. And when they find you, if they find you, it'll look like an accident. A tragic training incident. Maybe we're checking equipment and something fell. Maybe there was a struggle with an intruder. The narrative writes itself. People will ask questions. People ask questions about plenty of things. Doesn't mean they get answers. He was close now. Too close. You should have stayed in your lane. Should have taken the wins I gave you and kept your mouth shut. I don't take wins from men like you. His hand shot out. Faster than I expected and grabbed my throat. Not choking. Crushing. I drove my knee up, aiming for his groin. He twisted, took it on the thigh, barely flinched. His other hand came up, both now locked around my neck, and he slammed me backward into a support pillar. My skull cracked against concrete. Stars exploded in my vision. I clawed at his hands, tried to break his grip. But he was leveraging his full weight now, thumbs digging into my windpipe, cutting off blood flow to my brain. I gave you opportunities, he hissed, face inches from mine. Chances to fall in line. To be smart. You chose this. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. My lungs were screaming for air that wouldn't come. Do you know how easy this is? He whispered. How simple. 3 minutes. That's all it takes. 3 minutes and you're gone. And no one will ever know. My vision was tunneling. Gray at the edges, then black. My hands were still on his wrists, but I couldn't feel them anymore. Couldn't feel anything except the pressure and the pain and the certainty that he was right. 3 minutes. I had maybe one left. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The biometric monitor against my ribs was registering the spike, the crash, the threshold breach. And somewhere in the darkness closing in around me, a signal was transmitting. Cold meridian. Emergency protocol. Everything I'd documented was uploading, scattering to the 3 endpoints I'd programmed. Irreversible. Unstoppable. But I didn't know if it would matter. Because in 3 minutes, I'd be dead. Crowell's face was the last thing I saw before the darkness took me. That smile. That goddamn smile of absolute certainty. And then I heard it. Distant. Distorted. Like it was coming from underwater. Cold meridian. Crowell's grip didn't loosen. But something in his expression changed. A flicker. Confusion. Then fear. Cold meridian. Drop her. Now. The pressure on my throat eased. Not released, eased. Enough that a thin stream of air forced its way into my lungs. I gasped, choking, tasting blood. Crowell's hands were still on my neck, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking over his shoulder at the bay entrance. And what he saw drained every ounce of certainty from his face. Commander Nathan Mercer stood in the doorway. Not alone. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes was beside him. And behind them, 6 more operators. Armed. Ready. Step away from her, Admiral. Mercer's voice was quiet. Controlled. The way you'd speak to someone holding a hostage. Step away now. Crowell's hands released my throat. I collapsed, hitting the ground hard, gasping and coughing and trying to force air past my crushed windpipe. Everything hurt. Everything burned. Commander Mercer, Crowell said, voice steady, already shifting into command mode. This is a misunderstanding. Lieutenant Commander Ward and I were. Don't. Mercer cut him off. Don't insult my intelligence. We received the signal 18 minutes ago. Cold Meridian Emergency Protocol. We know what that means. I don't know what signal you're. The biometric alert, Danny said, stepping forward. The one that broadcasts when someone's heart rate indicates they're dying. The one that simultaneously transmits encrypted files to 3 separate endpoints. He held up a tablet. Files currently being reviewed by Naval Intelligence. Files containing financial records, communication logs, and evidence of systematic corruption spanning 4 years. I watched Crowell's face. Watched the exact moment he understood. He'd lost. Not just the fight. Everything. You're making a mistake, he said, but his voice had changed. The authority was gone. I'm a decorated officer. I have connections. This will be buried. No. The voice came from behind Mercer. A woman stepped through the doorway. Mid-50s. Severe suit. Calm eyes. Director Marianne Lowell. Naval Intelligence. It won't. Crowell went pale. The files were quite thorough, Admiral. Lowell's voice was conversational. Almost pleasant. Contract manipulation. Fund diversion. Abuse of authority. And now attempted murder of a superior officer. She's not. Lieutenant Commander Ward was promoted 2 weeks ago, Lowell said. The orders came through yesterday. You were supposed to be notified this morning. She smiled. Thin. Congratulations, Commander Ward. Pity Admiral Crowell missed the memo. I was still on the ground, throat on fire, vision swimming. But I heard every word. Crowell had just tried to murder a superior officer. That wasn't career-ending. That was life-ending. You can't prove anything, Crowell said, but there was desperation in it now. Your files are circumstantial. My lawyers. Your lawyers will be very busy, Lowell interrupted. Because the files included audio recordings. Timestamped. Encrypted to prevent tampering. Including a recording from approximately 20 minutes ago in which you detailed your intent to murder Commander Ward and stage it as an accident. The biometric device. It hadn't just been monitoring my vital signs. It had been recording. Everything. I'd learned that from Crowell himself. Document everything. Build a case that survives scrutiny. I'd just done it better. Crowell looked at me then. Really looked. And what I saw in his face wasn't anger or hatred. It was disbelief. He couldn't comprehend that I'd beaten him. Rear Admiral Keegan is en route, Lowell said. He'll be taking temporary command of this base until a formal investigation is complete. You're to surrender your weapon and your credentials. Now. For a moment, I thought Crowell might fight. Might try to bull his way through Mercer and Danny and the operators who'd formed a semicircle around him. But he didn't. He just stood there, hands at his sides, while Mercer stepped forward and relieved him of his sidearm and his badge. Admiral Jonathan Crowell, Mercer said formally, you are hereby confined to quarters pending charges of attempted murder, corruption, abuse of authority, and conspiracy. Do you understand? Crowell didn't answer. 2 military police officers appeared and led him away. He didn't look at me as he passed. I was still on the ground, trying to breathe normally, when Danny crouched beside me. You good, Commander? I nodded. Tried to speak. My throat felt like it had been crushed by a vice. Don't talk, he said. Medic's on the way. You're going to be fine. But I wasn't looking at Danny. I was looking at Mercer, who was standing in the doorway, tablet in hand, reading through the files I'd sent. He met my eyes. And nodded. Just once. Message received. Mission complete. They took me to medical. Ran scans. Confirmed what I already knew: crushed larynx, damaged trachea, severe bruising. I'd be drinking through a straw for a week and sounding like I'd gargled gravel for a month. But I'd live. Crowell's hearing happened 3 weeks later. Closed session. Classified. But the outcome wasn't. Dishonorable discharge. 15 years in a military prison. Forfeiture of all rank, pay, and benefits. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd protected. Gone. Captain Owen Stratton was quietly reassigned. No charges filed, but his career was effectively over. The Navy doesn't forget who stays silent when it matters. And me? I spent 6 weeks in recovery. Physical therapy for my throat. Psych evaluations to make sure I wasn't traumatized beyond function. I wasn't. I was angry. But anger is fuel. And I'd learned how to burn it clean. When I came back, Rear Admiral Keegan was waiting. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Just gestured to a chair and slid a folder across his desk. New assignment, he said. Oversight and Accountability Division. You'll be investigating corruption cases across Naval Special Operations. Autonomous Authority. Direct reporting to Naval Intelligence. I opened the folder. Read the first page. It was everything I'd ever wanted. The authority to hunt people like Crowell. The resources to actually stop them. Why me? I asked. Keegan looked at me for a long moment. Because you didn't break. Because you documented instead of retaliated. Because when he had his hands around your throat, you didn't beg. He paused. And because you're the only person I trust to do this job without becoming what you're hunting. I took the assignment. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've investigated 14 cases. Closed 11. 3 more are ongoing. I've ended careers. Sent officers to prison. Dismantled corruption networks that had been operating for decades. And every time someone asks who's running the investigation, they get the same answer. Cold Meridian. The call sign used to mean something was going catastrophically wrong. Now it means something different. It means someone's watching. It means the corruption you thought was hidden isn't hidden anymore. It means that if you're abusing your authority, if you're hurting the people who serve under you, if you think your rank makes you untouchable, I'm coming. And I don't need to be in the room to end you. I'll document everything. Build a case that survives scrutiny. Wait for exactly the right moment. And when you finally realize what's happening, when you feel that first flutter of fear because something in your carefully constructed world has shifted, that's when you'll hear it. Cold Meridian. The call sign that used to mean distress. Now it means accountability. Jonathan Crowell learned that in Logistics Base 7 when he had his hands around my throat and thought he'd won. He hadn't. He'd just made me better at what I do. And what I do now is make sure people like him never get the chance to do it again. My name is Commander Elise Ward. My call sign is Cold Meridian. And if you're in a position of authority, if you're thinking about abusing it, if you believe your rank protects you, you should know something. I'm already watching. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. And comment below telling me where you're watching from. Because stories like this, stories about accountability, about justice, about the people who refuse to stay silent when authority becomes tyranny, these stories survive because you engage with them. Share this. Talk about it. Make it impossible to bury. Because the Jonathan Crowells of the world depend on silence. And I don't do silent anymore. Cold Meridian is active. And I'm just getting started.